Hey folks, we're kind of get settled in here for a new painting. For this time we are, you can see there, doing Crime Suspense Stories number 22, the cover that almost killed comics. This is the one that Wortham and Gaines had a healthy debate about. And so we're going to dive right in. We have our paint set here for us. We haven't mixed anything up yet. We're going to start, let's just block in the red at the top, get some value real quick and easy. No need to even really cut the red with any other colors. It's going to be straight Crimson Red Lake. Make sure we got it nice and thin there. Yeah, that should be fine. All right, so we got our scratch board going. You know, let's actually start with the fatter brush. I'm gonna go with our 5, be a bit much. That's the 8. I'm gonna go with the 8, the 5. There's the 4. Choices, choices, choices. Let's go with the 4. Load our brush up pretty healthy there. Just to get, quite literally, the broad strokes here. Get as much coverage as we can without getting too tied into details yet. Like I said, this one's a little bit late for the Halloween paintings we did, which would be a bit more thematically appropriate. But I just had so much fun doing the Haunted Tank page in our last painting that I wanted to do something, straight out of the comics again. And I was thinking, hey, what has better, colors than some of those old EC horror comics? Just especially Graham Engels had some great greens and yellows and such. But when you talk about famous EC covers, Crime Suspense Stories number 22 is always going to be, a part of the discussion as one of the all-time greats. First off, just based upon Johnny Craig's fantastic art, but also because of, again, the conversation between Wortham and Gaines, talking about, or maybe it's a congressional hearing in Gaines, talking about, what is the appropriate level of gore. And Gaines saying, hey, if we showed some blood hanging from the woman's neck here, that would be inappropriate. But as it is, it's suggestive, but not terrible, which is a wonderful thing to have to explain yourself. That red stays in that brush. Okay, let's get that out there a little bit more. Now we can come back in with our number 1. Get some of the fine details around the lettering. And again, it's not going to be that big of a deal because we're going to hit these with a black border as it is. So if things aren't perfect, we have ample opportunity to make them look exactly as we want as we progress. This one, because of its elegance and simplicity, I figured this would be a lot faster than our Haunted Tank painting, which was, what, 7 panels technically. Different angles, a couple different, sets of, focal points, and the characters and the vehicles, so different colors to work with. Well, this one is fairly limited, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It's like, it's direct. It's like, there is one thing happening on this cover. The rest is just this, the bold titling here, and then the image itself. It's crazy for something that over a solid third, it looks like, of the cover being just lettering, being so iconic. You think that the image itself has to be bigger. Like, no, it's just solid because of what it is. We've got a lot of cases now of graphic novels being banned in schools and libraries for objectionable content, this time rather than violence or drug use, it's sex and sexuality. And it's the same old song, and it's the same old bullshit. But at least here on this stream, you will get all of the gory, easy action that you can take. Of course, I grew up not with the original comics as such. I grew up with the Tales from the Crypt television series on HBO and the Russ Cochran reprints of the EC titles. I still, when I go to the comic book shop, will look in their back issue bins, long boxes and such, and see if I can find, again, reader copies of just the reprints, because I'm not into it for collecting these. I would love to have originals, but I actually just take a pile of them and lay down and read. And of course, by the time that I had gotten a hold of these in their reprint form, the media landscape had changed. I remember seeing several Nightmare on Elm Street films in the theaters. We were watching RoboCop all the time, Predator. I think I even went to see Dead Ringers. I didn't understand it and I was kind of bored, but I wasn't, sheltered and hidden away from what would be considered, in the 50s, like, oh my God, this is child abuse to expose someone so young to such terrible imagery. And I was like, nah, it's cool. I want to go back and watch Dead Ringers again because I was so bored as a kid. I never saw it. I never went back to it. And I'd really like to go back now as an adult and say, hey, wow, that was pretty messed up to take a kid to see. I don't know if we thought it was just another horror movie or what, but that's not the impression that I get reading about it again as an adult. Oh, speaking of which, I have not had a chance, since it's been released to streaming, to check out Crimes of the Future. I want to check that out. Body horror can be hit or miss for me. Just for how much I can take, it's not my thing. But it looks fascinating visually, and the cast is great. I'm seeing a lot of promotion on Twitter for Bones and All, and that one looks like a rough watch. We'll see what I am able to dedicate time to. The biggest difficulty is I like to watch horror movies when I'm folding the laundry. That's just kind of my thing. But if I'm sitting in the middle of the living room, like every 10 minutes, one of the kids comes in and says, "Can you turn that off? I don't want to hear that. I don't want to see that." So it makes it hard to sit down and watch anything for long. My go-to laundry folding movie is Midsummer. I don't know why. That one's just a strange habit that I got into. It won't be Hereditary. Not a Hereditary. I was definitely a one-time watch. Stuff with kids is rough. Actually, something, I guess, relatively tame as Dr. Sleep, I never finished. I actually turned it off when the Hat Lady and her cohort had kidnapped a little baseball boy. And, he's like, "I'm scared." And she's like, "Good. Are you going to hurt me?" "Yes, we are, because that makes it taste better," and all this sort of stuff. Makes it more potent. Magic is more powerful, or whatever. And the kid's just crying that he's scared. And I'm like, "No, I don't need to watch that." And again, I'm sure I could have just fast forwarded past that, the remaining minute or so of the scene. Couldn't have been much more to it. But I just dipped. Just said no. Put something else on. So something like Bones and All, where again it's less fantastic, it's more people oriented. That makes it a little bit harder for me to sit through. Like I never have bothered to go through and watch was it Henry? Portrait of a Serial Killer? Yeah. I'm sure, again, Michael Rooker is a fantastic actor. And it's got, great reviews from people I respect. But I don't need it. Now this painting will be interesting because, like I said, so much of it will be relatively quick here with the title and imprint information. There's some fine detail around the EC logos and the lettering. Those are made as do by pen rather than with brush. And again, like I said, there's a fair amount of, there's just some simplicity to the image itself that, if we can knock this one out, in a couple hours, I'd still feel good because I want to see how well I do with realistic colors on humans, and with blending, and again with color consistency. A lot of things that I've been working on. Between the O and the T. Let's fill in this little aperture and the R. Come back to the O. Looking pretty bold so far. I like it. I don't know what would be the most modern comic cover or page or pinup or whatever I would go for. I think, and again, maybe this is my age, I will probably stick to at least a newsprint era rather than glossy pages, computer color. Just a personal preference, born likely from what I grew up with. I haven't been a steady comic purchaser in probably the past at least 10 years. I used to go every other Friday, payday, with my friends John and George, and we would go to our local comic book shop, which was it wasn't very local, the one we went to, kind of a pain in the ass drive actually, and then we'd come back across town to a favorite restaurant slash bar where we'd get dinner, and guys would have some beers, and it was great. I got a ton of comics at the time. I had just Comic Selector, I think, is the app, the one that you can list all your comics and your covers are shown there, and I was really into my collection at the time, but I was buying faster than I could read, and so I ended up with doubles of multiple issues, I realized later on, because I see a cover of a new comic and say, hey, that looks cool, I've not read that, let me go ahead and buy that, and then I'd end up putting it aside, other things going on and such, and just never get around to reading it. And 2 weeks later, it would still be on the shelves for that title, since the new issue hadn't come out yet, and I'd be like, oh neat, that comic looks cool, that's a very cool cover, I should pick that up. And it's like, you dummy. You don't need another, you're not a speculator, you're not trying to get in these key issues, which they weren't, they were just basic everyday new issues. Let that bleed in there a little bit. I don't really keep up with I treat comics somewhat similarly to how I treat wrestling these days, honestly, where I don't pay much attention to the real thing. Wrestling, I will watch a number of wrestling GIFs on Twitter. I will watch people discussing comics on YouTube. Specifically, I really like, right now I'm watching a lot of Casually Comics with Sasha. Young Canadian woman. She has a really good in-depth thing on Nora Freeze, which I enjoyed. One of the best comics videos I've seen in a while actually was Hugbees talking about the best Riddler story from Batman Black and White. Which I recommend for people to watch because it was good. I may yet pick up that issue just to have that really cool story. I know it's available digitally, but I may have moved largely to digital for movies and music, but I haven't made the jump for books, strangely enough. And comics are definitely a part of that. You know, I don't mind having to flick my eyes across a page. I don't like having really to scroll across an image to read the thing and scroll back, and just never felt digital's been a great medium for me for comics. I'm going to take a little concentration here as I just kind of do this fine line across the crime box, then across the bottom. Oh, almost dipped into the black there. Now let me check. There's a slight border, I guess. I can make it as slight or as bold as I want. Because just like when I was doing game intro screens, or when I was, hand drawing and painting the Mad Balls, things don't have to be 100% accurate to the source material. I've accepted a long time ago with comics and games and movies and books and everything else that adaptations of a thing are not the thing, and they can be very different from the original. That's good. They can be their own thing. That's what we want. Things to be free, to be their own thing. All right, so I think we got around all that. We'll go ahead and fill in. Okay, come back around to the top right logo. Uh-oh. Good, that goes into the black, so. Got a little careless with our brush. But it's in a spot where, again, we have a buffer, and we're going to work around it. So I started a couple episodes of Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities on Netflix. The first episode I watched was Pickman's Model, which, you know, was probably not the best choice for me, because that is actually one of my favorite Lovecraft stories. Some people have called it, you know, a minor work at best. I've always liked it. And like I said, I have to accept, and I usually do, that adaptations are not going, or should not, you know, be the same as their source material. But it was such a departure. I felt that you had somebody who was like super creepy, naturally creepy in Crispin Glover, and he did a good job with what he was given. I just didn't care for it. Just did not dig it. Get a little bit more water here on the yellow. So it's a total of 4 drops. Mix it up nice and bright. Our scratch board here is actually from a dead project, well, a postponed project, where I was going to do, and I still will, Christmas gift labels. Have those printed up, punch little holes, maybe even go ahead and add strings to them or what have you. Going for a 50s kitsch Christmas style, with a little bit of a, you know, a naughty edge to it. Get the whole Betty Page thing going on. And what I was actually working on was a Mrs. Claus standing behind a present. And the Mrs. Claus was actually taken from a Cody Vore TikTok, where she was doing the Korn song. And she had this like nurse's outfit. I'm like, you know what? I could make that into a Mrs. Claus. But again, when I try and go into drawing, so far I was really happy with all the Mad Balls. It's okay with Most of my Zelda stuff, the Metroid stuff. But I did not do so well on my drawing of a Codivore based Mrs. Claus. So that is my scratch board at the moment. Mix, 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 mix. Lots of mix there. Come on. Jolting tales of tension in the EC tradition, of course. And so much of this cover is taken up by text and non-art related spaces, and it still knocks it out of the park. You know what I'm saying? Again, that is a tribute to Johnny Craig. What we got, bud?
Did you ask yet?
Did I ask who what?
To see if I can play with my friend.
I have not. We talked about this. We talked about it after the movie.
Is it after the movie?
I said we talked about it after the movie.
And you still haven't?
Mommy
told you to ask.
When?
After the movie.
After the movie, I thought we said it's their turn to ask.
He told you to ask.
I was in here. I didn't hear anybody ask me to ask anything. We watched Enchanted. We're going to watch Disenchanted sometime soon. Probably again over here over Thanksgiving break. And again, we have a fair amount of grace with the yellow we're doing here for this text box, because we're going to fill in these letters with darker colors, blacks and blues. So if a little yellow bleeds in there, that is no harm, no problem at all. It does touch upon one of the difficult areas for me is, again, fine line control for lettering. That is a definite, still learning process for me. Trying to get better at that as we go. So with this wet yellow, it is picking up or smearing a little bit of the pencil, which again, not a big deal. I'll add some depth to the yellow. You know, one of the cool things about watercolors is that not everything has to be flat or uniform. Things can be literally fluid. We're at 36 minutes in, and as far as, you know, just actual real estate goes, almost half the cover is covered. Because these big blocks of yellow and red, you know, the true test of the painting will come when we get into our husband and wife here. Not so happily married, apparently. A little bit into our cerulean blue. You know what? That actually is a bit too soon because we still got a lot of the yellow is wet, so we do not want to touch that yet. Actually, let's take that back out. And we're going to do a little bit with some black first. One more drop there. Because, like I said, in previous videos, this watercolor black is a whole different beast than what I was expecting when I started trying to teach myself how to do watercolors. Probably do a one pass for coverage. We'll come back through for depth, because as you progress with, you know, a single brush load, the farther you go, the black tends to become thinner, becomes a gray. And I do want some color consistency. Again, that is something that I'm working on as far as my practice efforts here. So you see me go back to the palette fairly frequently when doing any blacks, just to get a nice solid color on the brush. A little bit of a stray hair on our brush. It got brought back under control. No major damage. I've been talking about colorists as I've been doing these paintings, and really developing a newfound respect for their particular skill set. Another group that doesn't always get, especially today, their due are letterers. Seems like now everything is digital font packs, which again may be huge time savers. I don't know. But think about, like, was it Artie Simek? Was that the guy, the main guy at Marvel? I'm amazed that a deficiency or a lack of something at EC became kind of a trademark, and that I don't think they had, at least on their horror books, a letterer, and everything was typed. And somehow, maybe again through association, that became the horror font for me, is whatever typewriter font they had. Maybe associating it with, horror paperbacks and pulp publications and such, and give it a kind of griminess as opposed to an artfulness. And that griminess kind of helped make the horror books stand out as, like, this is not like a normal comic book. It did make it feel a bit more mature or adult, because it was, like a book. Like I said, when I go to the comic book shops, I look for these EC reprints and Gladstone era Disney books. Because even though, my primary thing growing up was, superhero books, there was a huge and important subsection of comics for me, which were the Disney books. I think maybe primarily driven initially by we got a couple issues of Uncle Scrooge about the time that DuckTales was hitting big. I still have that first issue of Uncle Scrooge that I bought. Got it signed by Don Rosa. So whenever we hit, a place with a decent back issue selection, pardon me, those are kind of things that I look for. That and anything from CFW Comics. They were apparently a very small, not terribly long-lived publisher. Tales of the Robo Warriors, Tales of the Kung Fu Warriors, Shred. Same place I got that Uncle Scrooge. There was a small convenience store in Devola, Ohio. I go to visit my grandmother. My brother and I would walk up there, get some comics or like a Panini sticker book, some cheap like Army Men style, toys. And somehow we got this random issue of Tales of the Kung Fu Warriors, and it blew our little juvenile minds. It may have been my first actual exposure to, Jackie Chan movies through the ads in the back or throughout the book, for people selling imports and bootlegs and such, ninja weapons. This was a time when ninjas were very much the thing. Actually, I may have to dig that issue out. I think by now I've got a couple copies of it, and I think I sent a full run, as much as I could find, of Tales of the Kung Fu Warriors to my brother as well. There were some awesome pinups. I remember there was this sort of demonic armor pinup that my brother and I were just astounded by. It reminded me of the armored guards at Lo Pan's wedding in Big Trouble in Little China, like the one that Jack Burton stabs in the stomach with his boot knife and it falls on him. But it was like this sort of post-apocalyptic thing. I don't know what the hell's going on. We just knew that that was like the most badass picture that we had ever seen. I think the primary artist that I remember was a guy named Derek Gross. And he's still around. He's still kicking, doing some stuff. Don't know if he's had any comic stuff recently. But what I found interesting, again, for 90s kids, you may have seen a sex education book. Not a school sanctioned thing, but you might find this on your parents' shelf sort of thing. A book called The Guide to Getting It On. And he did the art for that, which I thought was hilarious. I didn't know about it. I found it at a friend's house. This friend who I would eventually end up marrying. But she had it. And I was like, this art looks really familiar. This style is, just something I can't get out of my mind. And I, wasn't until later on I connected, like, oh wait, I know who this is. This is Derek Gross. And that Derek Gross is the guy who did my really cool Kung Fu comics as a kid. Well, while I was a kid, not while he was a kid, of course. Again, this flat, just bold black and red. I am digging it. Again, this may not be the most exciting part of the painting, but EC knew what they were doing with color contrasts and, statement pieces. You're putting this on, putting this on a rack somewhere on a newsstand. Of course, this is the part that's going to stand out, at the top. And so this is what really has to grab the reader's attention. I need to put a big chunk of red in there, don't I? So they made sure that their titles were visible and grabbed your attention. We'll have to come back around to this piece. Get the red in there, then we'll hit it again. And, I watched the first season of Creepshow on Shudder. I know some folks who were super into it. For me, it was a bit of a mixed bag. I didn't always understand some of the stories. Honestly, some of the motivations were weird. Some of them were really fun episodes. It was definitely more, as the original Creepshow, a descendant of Tales from the Dark Side than it was of, the EC books. Dark Side, of course, took a lot from and was inspired by EC, but it was, a lot of times it could be more straight horror, or horror comedy, or even sci-fi sometimes, but it wasn't as much forced into being a morality play that the EC books frequently were. I can't remember many, if any, real instances of a bad guy getting away with being a bad guy in the EC comics. Whereas in Darkside, it was just like bad things can happen to anyone, and that's it. There doesn't always get to be any justice. Bad things can just happen. And so Creepshow definitely followed that model of just, here's spooky stories. red there and the black here. Okay. Then we got to work around the SuspenStories piece. We can come back to the blue to write in tension in the Jolting Tales of Tension. See how the red missing from that C. I could keep going with the black around the SuspenStories, but I need to finish that piece. That's going to bug me if I don't. Got to really clean off our brush. Again, risky when you're going wet on wet or near wet with the watercolors, because they may want to play a bit more nicely with one another than you want them to. We do not want this red to pick up any of the black. We don't want the black to pick up too much of the red. We want to keep them separate. There we go. That's looking pretty nice. That's looking pretty nice. Yeah, about an hour in. We've got most of the cover taken care of. Let's go ahead and do that blue. Again, our cerulean blue back on the brush. We'll come back in for those other colors here shortly. Good. Looks like we need to get some of the excess water off before we go in, and it gives us a little bit more control, but it does thin our blue. So we just finished watching the last episode of The Vow on HBO last night. The Keith Raniere Nexium thing. That's been kind of a weird pandemic time show for my wife and I. And the part that, the crimes themselves, of course, are terrible. But what I'm astounded by, a little too much water there, are the people who are standing by the dude. and how they don't see I'm sorry, once we can just walk up to them and say, hey, did he or did he not have sex with a child, which is, rape, and take pictures of her and all sorts of stuff. And they want to start debating age of consent laws and, how this wouldn't be bad in different periods of time or whatever. I'm sorry, no, you are on the losing side of the argument. This guy did bad things and deserves to be in prison. But they are just so deeply locked in that they just are continuing to support him. And I'm like, that is cray cray. That is frightening. That people can just see that blue went too far on the O. And it sounds like at times, as the evidence comes out and people testify, they're like, this is going to be really bad because, they're going to say what happened and that's not going to make us look good. That should tell you that what you're defending is not good. But they're just kind of like, people just don't understand what this is all about. I'm like, no, because it's crazy go nuts bananas. All right, I'm going to do a little bit more on this one, and then I will probably call it an early night. I'm still getting hammered by this whole daylight savings time thing with it being dark so early. I'm like, yeah, it's time for bed. It's like, it's 6, 7 o'clock, you can stay up a little bit later. In this case, we'll probably finish up here by 8. Let things dry. Then come back probably day after tomorrow. Take tomorrow as a pure family day. I need a little bit, another drop of water here in the black. Just one though. So again, so far, I have not had to focus much on shading, color control, color consistency, color blending. But I've had a pretty good time with line control and paint thickness. I think those are important. That's what everything here is me trying to learn better. And that's why, and I posted this on Twitter. I said, here's the next thing I'm going to paint. And no, I did not draw it. I traced the picture from a printout on a light box because I'm not trying at this point, to master illustration, I am trying to learn how to paint, how to use watercolors. And so that's where my focus is. You know, when I do things by hand or original art, you know, like the Mad Balls are fully mine. I don't use any light boxing or tracing. I look at the pictures and I draw those myself. So I want those to be known as, you know, my paintings and illustrations combined, but these are me just trying to learn watercolor skills on images that I like. Let me get a corner of that R. All right, so let's kind of go. Let's see how we want to do these. We can be a little bit free-handy with the SuspenStories lettering. Because it's supposed to be a little bit shivery, a little bit wavery and quavery. Crime Sue. Oh, what I was saying, with each of these paintings, I do try and take the time during and after to note what I thought I did well, what I think I could do better in the future, and what I learned over the course of the painting. So I can carry that forward into whatever we do next. Crime sus. Yes, it is. yeah, I'm jumping around here. Back to the vow and Nexium. Some people, I think, woke up, once they had to face the reality of the charges they were facing. Some people, I think, still believe, but also are smart enough to know how to cover their own ass. I understand those people. The ones that I don't get are the ones who are still just like, no, nothing bad happened here. And I don't get it. I just do not understand that level of indoctrination. Like, these people are deep in this. And they keep saying, like, there were a lot of people who were helped by this. How could someone who does good things for some people be bad? I'm like, are you listening to yourself? How can someone who helped me be bad to someone else? Very easily. And I'd say that's part of, the MO. Let me treat a lot of people good to get them on my side, so I can treat a lot of other people really badly, and people will defend me. And Ranieri didn't even seem like he's, exceptionally smart or anything. Just manipulative and bold. And I guess, to be a cult leader, you have to have that level of delusional self-confidence and narcissism to believe that people will do what you say. The rest of, their program seem to be based in fairly standard cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, which are frequently very beneficial. This guy just used those and, got people to open up and confess things and use their emotional insecurities and self-doubt and such against them, and said, hey, this is how you get better. No. That's coming along pretty well. This is again, I think I've used all of 1, 2, 3 colors so far. I really overestimated on the palette what I was going to get done today. But what I discovered in doing the Haunted Tank page the other day is that this stuff doesn't need to go to waste. It is watercolor. And to make it paint again, you just add water. So if it dries out on the palette, you know, hey, it might be bad for my palette long term. Might stain it a little bit, but I haven't even noticed that. Otherwise, just keep painting. This, of course, is not just our painting room. This is an overall art and crafting room. And so it is also currently being used for cutting fabric to make reusable gift bags for the holidays, which I think is fantastic. I am a big fan of the work that the household is doing here on those gift bags. My wife's doing a great job. It may be expensive up front, but man, wrapping paper is unreasonably expensive. And it gets thrown away literally, like, as soon as it's served its purpose one time. So we're going to use up what we have. But ideally, you know, our kids are old enough now that seeing the same bag a couple times isn't going to hurt anybody's feelings. So we can use these for years to come. Oof. It's going to be hard to get around the small lettering up in the corners and such, but that's probably going to be, again, a pen task. But the colors here are looking good. The multiple changes in fonts from smooth lettering to wobbly is a challenge. These are definitely spots where we need to come back through to get a more solid color. All right, I think that might be, that's our hour and 20 minutes or so. Come up right here at 8 o'clock. We're going to, actually, I'm going to mix these paints here. So when we do reinvigorate them, they come back full of life, with the exception of the white, which we will leave unblended. So make ourselves a nice green, which we were going to mix anyways because we wanted to give her dress kind of a greenish, and it's kind of it's a nice gray in the original, but I want to do a little greenish gray. All right, mix up a brown. Again, this will be primarily for our murderer's slacks. You're going to commit a murder, you want to wear some nice, comfortable khakis, apparently. Get all the color out of these brushes here. Okay, and into our darker blue. It's going to be for our guy's shirt. I'm almost tempted to dive into the shirt right now, but I just do not have the energy, the motivation to hit that right now. The rest of those are all set. So we are going to call it a night. Thanks for hanging out and watching these videos here on Twitch. Same place on YouTube. YouTube, Another Terrible Idea. On Twitter, While It Lasts, at ATI channel. Also check out our bots, Uatu bot, UATU bot, and Rasslebot, WRASSLE bot, for comic and wrestling shenanigans. We'll check you all out next time. Peace.